Hey guys, tonight we step quietly into a place most people never really picture when they imagine the Middle Ages. A drafty, ember-glowing kitchen where every surface is coated in a soft haze of smoke, and every corner hums with life you can't quite see yet. You're standing right at the threshold, feeling the heat from the hearth lick at your cheeks, while the rest of the world behind you hangs cold and hungry in the dark. You can smell something bubbling, herbs, onions, maybe even a hint of something sweet. And for a second you're not sure if you're supposed to eat here or run away from the suspicious aromas. Honestly, you probably won't survive this place if you're allergic to dust, fire, or the medieval definition of clean, which was mostly good enough. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it for you? I love seeing the little constellation of sleepy travelers all across the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take your first careful step into the medieval kitchen, ducking instinctively even though the thick beams overhead are well above your head. It's an old habit you pick up fast in places like this. The air is warm, warmer than any other room in the building, and it vibrates with a soft chorus of crackles, drips, snaps, and muffled human muttering. The cook, a round-shouldered woman with flour on half her face and soot on the other half, doesn't bother acknowledging you. She's wrestling a heavy cauldron as if it personally insulted her entire family. Behind her, a boy is chopping leeks with the exaggerated misery only a 10-year-old tasked with kitchen work can produce. You trudge deeper, letting your eyes adjust. Everything in here is alive with purpose. Medieval kitchens weren't decoration pieces. No shining copper pans, no spotless tiles, no curated rustic chic aesthetic. This is the beating heart of survival, feeding families, servants, and the occasional passerby who is probably also hiding from their responsibilities. Historians still argue whether some of the forgotten recipes we rediscover today were staples or once-a-year experiments, but what you see right now is the everyday grind. Warming, chopping, stirring, improvising, hopping, nothing explodes. The hearth is enormous, big enough that two people could stand in it if they weren't worried about becoming human brisket. Hooks and iron bars cross its opening like some kind of culinary ribcage. Chains hold pots at different heights, each one swinging slightly with the movement of the fire. A spit turns slowly, not with some fancy mechanism, but with a boy who looks like he's wondering how life brought him here. If you squint, you notice his reward on a nearby stool, a tiny wedge of cheese. Suddenly, everything about the Middle Ages makes sense. You catch the smell of burning rosemary. Someone tossed a sprig onto the coals, maybe for flavor, maybe for symbolism, maybe just because it fell out of their apron and they shrugged. On the far wall, bread rests on a wooden board, dough rising under rough linens. This is the kind of bread that doesn't care about precise hydration levels or perfect gluten networks. It cares whether you needed it before your hands froze in winter. Your boots crunch lightly over scattered barley grains and bits of onion peel. The floor is stone, uneven from centuries of foot traffic, and occasionally damp where something has spilled. You hear a distant hiss but can't identify whether it's a boiling pot or a cat that's been stepped on. Frankly, in this kitchen, it could be either. You take in the tools, the massive stirring paddles, the iron tongs that look more like torture devices, the knives with blades worn into odd curves from generations of sharpening. One mainstream historical fact creeps into your mind here. These kitchens could feed dozens of people at once, which made them logistical powerhouses for medieval households, especially manors and castles. But the quirky counterpart is that many cooks also believed that singing to bread dough helped it rise better. And honestly, considering how chaotic this kitchen is, you can see why someone might try anything that promises cooperation. A thin layer of smoke floats near the ceiling, drifting lazily like it's choosing which corner to haunt. The ventilation here is optimistic at best, a wide hole in the roof and a few small windows cracked open against the cold. Whenever someone opens a door, the air reacts dramatically, as if the entire kitchen just gasped. The head cook finally notices you, or at least acknowledges the general area you occupy. She nods her chin toward a wooden table cluttered with ingredients: turnips, leeks, wild garlic, a suspicious dried fish that looks like it's reconsidering all its life choices, and a bowl of what might be eggs or might be something far more ominous. You approach the table slowly, taking in the textures. Vegetables here aren't polished and pretty. They're knobby, dirt-kissed, and full of character, like they grew up facing adversity. A pot nearby releases a bubble so violent it spits a bit of broth into the fire, sending up a quick spark. Nobody reacts. This is just kitchen ambience. You watch as the boy with the leeks wipes his nose on his sleeve, then immediately continues chopping. You decide you don't want to examine any food safety standards more deeply tonight. After all, you're here for atmosphere, not for a health inspection. Someone hands you a long-handled wooden spoon. You don't ask questions, you just accept your fate and stir the nearest pot. The liquid is thick, heavy, almost mud-like, and it clings to the spoon as if it has abandonment issues. It smells surprisingly comforting. Onion, barley, maybe a bit of pork fat. The cook nods approvingly, which is basically the medieval equivalent of winning a Michelin star. As you stir, you get a sense of why this kitchen matters. It's not just about food, it's social currency, survival strategy, tradition keeper, and community center. Cooks here know more secrets than priests, more gossip than tavern owners, and more chemistry than they're ever credited for. They've mastered the art of feeding people with limited tools, unpredictable ingredients, and fires that refuse to behave. You lean closer to the hearth, letting the warmth soak into your hands. A small clay pot at the edge holds something fragrant, apples cooking down with spices. You recognize cinnamon, which in this era was so expensive you could buy a sheep with the same money. But here it is, simmering away casually like it doesn't represent a fortune. Maybe the household is wealthy. Maybe a merchant's friend brought it as a gift. Or maybe the cook just knows where to hide the good stuff when the steward isn't looking. You notice a woman grinding herbs in a mortar, muttering under her breath. She looks like she's casting a spell, and honestly, she might be. Medieval kitchens blurred the line between cooking and magic more often than not. A sprinkle of sage here, a bit of mugwort there, half seasoning, half superstition. You remember that historians still argue whether some of these herb combinations were meant for flavor, healing, or warding off invisible gremlins who made bread collapse. Personally, after watching that pot try to explode earlier, you're not ruling out gremlins. A sudden draft sweeps through the kitchen, making the fire flare brighter. Everyone freezes, then relaxes when they realize it's just the outer door opening. A man enters carrying a heavy sack that hits the table with a dull thud. Flour, or maybe ground peas. Hard to tell. He wipes his brow, nods to the cook, and disappears again like a messenger from the flower dimension. You find yourself smiling. There's something chaotic but profoundly human about this room. It is messy, loud, imperfect, and full of improvisation. Basically, the medieval version of every group project ever. Your spoon slows as the pot thickens. Someone behind you laughs softly at a joke you didn't catch. A wooden bowl is pressed into your hands and you realize they expect you to taste. The cook raises an eyebrow. You take a cautious sip. It's good, earthy, warming, and simple. A flavor that wraps around you like a wool cloak. And just like that, the kitchen accepts you. Not as a master, but as a willing wanderer willing to stir, taste, and breathe in the centuries of forgotten recipes waiting to be rediscovered. You barely leave the warmth of the hearth before someone shoves a lump of dough into your hands, warm, soft, and dusted with flour that immediately transfers to your clothes like an over-enthusiastic medieval welcome. You blink, look down, and realize the dough is meant for one of the most surprisingly ancient and overlooked traditions of the medieval kitchen. Bread baked directly on the coals. No fancy brick oven here. No neat rows of loaves rising in perfect symmetry. just ash, ember, fire, and you, now holding a sticky blob of destiny. The cook jerks her chin toward the hearth floor, where glowing embers pulse like a dragon's relaxed heartbeat. You hesitate. She does not. With a swift, confident movement, she slaps her dough onto a patch of warm ash, pats it once for good luck, and goes back to bossing everyone around. You're expected to copy her, so you crouch, shuffle closer to the heat, and place your dough on a small cleared space where hot coals ring the edges like tiny guardians. It instantly begins to sizzle, not burn, not char, just sizzle, releasing a smell you weren't ready for, something ancient, earthy, smoky, and strangely mouth-watering. You rise slowly, brushing ash from your fingers, trying to pretend you totally knew what you were doing. A boy nearby snorts. He's turning a spit again, your old friend from earlier, but now he's upgraded his cheese reward to a slightly larger wedge. Success looks different in every era. Around you, the kitchen shifts into one of its many rhythms. Bread making isn't a once-a-day ordeal here, it's constant. Dough is always rising, resting, being kneaded, shaped, poked, or flung across a table when someone's patience runs out. And this ash bread, it's the working-class staple, the fast food of medieval life, the "we need something now before someone faints" solution. You kneel again to inspect your little bread puck. A thin skin has formed on the surface, the edges tightening slightly. Someone nudges you with an elbow, an older woman wearing an apron that has clearly lived through more battles than most armies. She points a crooked finger at the bread, then taps her ear. Listen. So you do. You lean close to the embers and hear it, the faint crackle of moisture escaping, a papery whisper of crust forming, a soft sigh from within the dough as it transforms. Bread that bakes directly against the heat doesn't rely on precision or technique. It relies on instinct and sound. Mainstream fact: medieval cooks genuinely used their ears as much as their eyes to judge doneness, especially before the widespread use of enclosed ovens. You sit back on your heels and realize how oddly calming this is. Maybe modern cooking has made us impatient. Here, you're forced to wait, listen, breathe. You're basically practicing 14th century mindfulness over a carb. One of the boys tosses a handful of damp herbs onto the fire, and the scent shifts sweet, sharp, herbal. Keeps the spirits away, he says with a grin. You ask which spirits. He shrugs. All of them. It's a fringe tidbit historians chuckle about. Some medieval households burned rosemary or juniper in kitchens because they believed it scared off mischievous beings who spoiled food. Whether this was superstition or an early understanding of smoke's antibacterial qualities, historians still argue whether there was method behind the magic. You check your bread again, gently lifting one edge with a stick. The bottom has darkened, but not in a call the fire brigade way, more like the rustic char you'd pay extra for at a modern boutique bakery. You flip it over. Sparks jump. A bit of ash clings to the dough like a clingy X. The smell intensifies. Nearby, another cook is preparing a different type of bread, flat, thin, slapped between hot stones like a medieval panini press. She's humming, completely in her element, shaping dough with a rhythm that feels older than language. This is the bread meant for immediate hunger, for field workers, travelers, stable hands. The kind that gets wrapped in cloth, stuffed into satchels, gnawed on during long walks through muddy roads. Your bread finishes first, small, imperfect, slightly blistered, but proud. The head cook plucks it from your hand without ceremony, cracks it open, and inspects it with narrowed eyes. A pause, then a grunt of approval. You may retire now as a fully licensed medieval ashbread prodigy. She breaks it in half and hands you the larger piece. The interior is dense but pillowy, steam rising like a tiny ghost escaping its floury prison. You blow on it, take a cautious bite, and immediately wonder why this isn't more of a thing today. It tastes like warmth, smoke, and a hint of the earth itself. Simple, honest, and far more comforting than the loaf you bought at the supermarket last Tuesday. The cook smirks at your reaction. Bread tells the truth, she says. You're not entirely sure what that means, but you nod like you understand deeply. You dunk the next piece into a small bowl of something nearby, a thick mash of herbs and vinegar. Your tongue tingles. You cough lightly, surprised. The older woman laughs, slapping your shoulder. Wakes you up, doesn't it? It absolutely does. As you walk through the kitchen nibbling your creation, you notice something else. Every class, every rank of medieval society relied on bread in one form or another. From royal feasts stacked with intricate pastries to farmhouses where rye loaves lasted a full week, or longer if you didn't mind gnawing, bread anchored the entire diet. Another quirky moment. A teen girl smacks the dough she's kneading 3 times, muttering a short phrase. You ask what she's doing. Making sure the devil doesn't hide in the bubbles, she says casually. You stare at her. She shrugs. It's just a habit. Honestly, you've seen people today tap their sourdough bowls like they're coaxing a pet snake awake. Humanity evolves, but it also really doesn't. You wander toward a side table where several loaves rest under cloth. Some are darker, rye, barley, oat blends meant to stretch grain supplies during hard seasons. Some are pale wheaten loaves reserved for wealthier households. One is shaped strangely, almost like a braid that got confused halfway through. The cook blushes and snatches that one away before anyone else can see. Experimentation existed then too. Your fingers brush a loaf that's still warm. You lift it and immediately feel its weight, surprisingly heavy, substantial. Medieval bread wasn't fluffy unless you were wealthy or lucky. It had presence, like it wanted you to know you were eating something serious. A full slice could fill you through hours of work. And if it went stale, it became trenchers' edible plates soaked with stew, then eaten or fed to dogs or the poor. Nothing wasted, everything used. You glance back at the hearth. New doughs are already being slapped onto the ash. More herbs tossed in. More flour drifting lazily through the air like medieval snow. It's all happening again. As you chew your last bite, something occurs to you. This ash and ember method wasn't just a trick. It was survival. When ovens broke, when fuel was scarce, when time was short, people used the ground itself as their baking surface. Stone, ash, ember, they were tools before metal ever met flame. There's something humbling about that, something grounding. You're tasting a technique older than kingdoms, older than languages, maybe older than your ability to pronounce yeast properly. The hearth cracks loudly, a log collapsing in on itself. Sparks swirl upward. The cooks barely respond. They're too busy working dough, shaping it, setting it near the heat. The cycle continues. You wipe ash from your fingers. Take one last look at the bread-baking choreography unfolding around you, and step back with a deeper appreciation for how something so simple, so crumbly, smoky, and slightly charred, could anchor an entire world day after day. And as your stomach warms and your hands still smell faintly of flour and fire, you realize you're ready to follow the next whisper the medieval kitchen sends your way. You barely have time to dust the flour from your clothes before someone tugs you toward a corner of the kitchen where the air feels heavier, thicker, almost swampy with steam. A massive cauldron hangs over a slow, steady flame, bubbling like it has no intention of stopping until winter ends, or maybe until the concept of time itself gives up. This is your introduction to the defining dish of the medieval everyday everything: pottage. You might think you've seen stew before, but pottage is a different creature entirely. It isn't quite soup, not exactly porridge, and definitely not glamorous. It's the medieval equivalent of that one roommate who's always around, always strange, and somehow always eating your leftovers. Pottage is the meal you turn to when you've got a little of this, a little of that, and absolutely no desire to starve today. You trudge closer, feeling the heat puff against your face. The smell hits next. A layered blend of onions, barley, leeks, cabbage, a bit of salted pork fat, and something you can't identify. Something earthy. Something that might have once been a root vegetable, or a leaf, or possibly part of a shoe. You lean in more carefully this time. The cook ladles a scoop toward you so thick it barely plops. You swear the contents are clinging to one another for moral support. Needs stirring, she grunts, shoving a wooden paddle into your hand. And so the cycle continues. You step up and start stirring, using your whole body to move the heavy mixture. The pot groans like it's annoyed you woke it from a nap. And as you stir, you see the layers. Some ingredients dissolve into a comforting mush, others hold their shape stubbornly, and still others, peas, beans, and the occasional rogue carrot, float triumphantly near the top like smug survivors of culinary Darwinism. One mainstream historical fact washes over you. Pottage wasn't just a dish, it was a lifestyle. Families kept a pot simmering for days, adding to it constantly. Yesterday's leftovers became today's base, and today's scraps would become tomorrow's sustenance. It was a perpetual meal, part stew, part tradition, part mild health hazard if you thought about it too hard. But remember, you're not here to judge. You're here to survive again, hopefully. A girl about 12 years old stands beside you, slicing something greenish. You aren't sure if it's an herb or a weed she pulled from outside. She tosses it into the pot confidently, and you ask what it is. She shrugs. It tastes okay. Then, with the wisdom of someone far older, she adds, mostly comforting. The kitchen around you hums with energy. People pass by, dipping ladles into the pottage, each one tasting it like a chef but reacting like a gambler. Some nod in approval, others frown. One man spits into the fire and mutters something about needing more salt. You can't help but smile. Then you overhear a bit of gossip that doubles as a quirky medieval tidbit. Apparently, in some towns, people believe that adding a specific herb, ground ivy, helped the pottage cook evenly and protected it from malicious spirits. The girl beside you raises an eyebrow. We just use it because it tastes nice with leeks. And honestly, that's probably closer to the truth, though historians still argue whether certain herbs were chosen for flavor, healing, or full-on supernatural protection. A loud clatter erupts behind you. Someone drops a sack of beans. Dried legumes bounce across the stone floor like tiny marbles of chaos. You step back just in time to avoid becoming a tragic slip-and-fall anecdote. The cook hollers, the boy sweeping curses, and the girl keeps slicing weeds or herbs. You still aren't sure. You shift your attention back to the pot, noticing the layers settling again. Pottage evolves quickly. The top begins to thicken as barley expands, creating a creamy blanket over the vegetables below. You give it another deep stir, and the kitchen scents swirl into a rich bouquet. Earthy, herbal, slightly sour, and surprisingly comforting. The medieval kitchen equivalent of that one candle scent called Old World Hearth, except, real. The head cook appears beside you like a storm cloud. She dips a spoon in, tastes, and squints at the ceiling like consulting divine wisdom. Needs something. She grabs a wooden bowl containing a paste so dark and thick it looks like sorcery. She plops a spoonful into the pot. The girl grins. That's her secret stock. You ask what's in it. She shakes her head dramatically. If she tells you, she'll have to turn you into stew. You're not convinced that's a joke. You start to wonder what the strangest version of pottage might have been. As if reading your mind, the girl leans in. Once, when we ran out of vegetables in winter, we made pottage with dried fish, old cabbage, and brewer's yeast. She wrinkles her nose. We don't talk about that winter. Someone across the room starts shouting about bread trenchers, and you look over to see slabs of stale bread being sliced and arranged like edible plates. This is where the pottage will eventually go, soaking the bread, softening it, transforming it into a second meal. Nothing wasted, nothing ignored. Even the bread has a career arc. You stir more slowly now, the paddle moving effortlessly as the mixture loosens under your rhythm. Sweat beads on your forehead. You wipe it away with your sleeve, embracing the medieval aesthetic fully. The cook nods approvingly again, and you think, okay, I'm getting the hang of this. Then a bubbling pocket suddenly bursts, sending a thick drop of pottage right onto your cheek. It's too hot to ignore. You yelp, and the girl laughs, not unkindly, more like, "Welcome to the club." You dab your face with a cloth. The burn is mild, but your pride is medium well. In the corner, a monk in simple robes stands quietly with a bowl, waiting for his ladleful. This household must be connected to a religious community, or maybe he's here on errands. Either way, pottage is universal. Even royalty ate it. though theirs included saffron or almonds or other expensive ingredients, transforming humble mush into fancy mush. You ladle a bit into the monk's bowl and he bows his head. "Blessings upon your stirring," he says solemnly. You blink. Thanks," he smiles thinly. You're not sure if that counts as a spiritual promotion, but it feels nice. The cook finally gestures for you to stop. She takes your paddle, flips it expertly between her hands, and sets it aside. She dips out a bowlful for you, plopping in a piece of bread trencher that soaks up the thick broth instantly. You cradle the bowl, feeling the warmth seep into your fingers. The taste surprises you again. Simple, yes, but layered with hours of slow cooking. The cabbage has melted into near sweetness. The leeks offer a grassy, bright finish. The pork fat ties everything together, and whatever secret paste she added, it probably has its own backstory and emotional baggage. As you eat, you scan the kitchen. Workers moving in concert, fires being stoked, herbs being chopped, pots being tended, bread being sliced. The steady hum of labor, the occasional burst of laughter, the slight, constant threat of being smacked with a wooden spoon if you stand in the wrong place. This meal, this endlessly customizable, never the same twice cauldron of survival, is the heartbeat of medieval life. You feel it now, beating with warmth, with centuries of hands that stirred before you, with stories preserved in steam and spoonfuls. And as you scrape the last bit from your bowl, letting it warm your belly, you realize you're ready to slip deeper into the kitchen's hidden world, to follow the next whisper rising from the fire. The warmth of the kitchen has followed you, clinging to your clothes like smoke and secrets. But tonight, you're walking beyond the peasant hearth, past the bubbling cauldrons, past the ash-blackened bread, past the pottage that could feed a small village for days. You're stepping through a narrow door that leads into a whole different universe, the great kitchens of the nobility. You emerge into a cavernous hall so large it feels like a cathedral dedicated entirely to gluttony. Fires roar in 3 separate hearths, their orange light dancing against the high, soot-streaked stone walls. Iron spits turn with rhythmic groans, each holding entire carcasses, boars, peacocks, even a small deer, glazed and shimmering like medieval disco balls. You can smell the fat melting into the coals, hear it hiss like impatient applause. And the noise, oh the noise. This isn't cooking, it's orchestration. You hear the clang of ladles, the scrape of knives, the barked orders of the master cook, a man wearing a stained apron but carrying himself like a field general. He doesn't just command ingredients, he commands people. A dozen scullions move like chess pieces around him, chopping, basting, carrying trays, dodging elbows. You can tell immediately who's new here. They're the ones with both eyebrows intact. "Keep up or burn out," someone mutters beside you, slamming a tray of pastries onto a side table. You glance down. The pastries look magnificent, spiraled layers of dough brushed with gold leaf, perfumed with rosewater. But when you lean closer, you realize the filling smells oddly fishy. The cook smirks. "Pike paste," he says proudly. "Fish disguised as dessert. His lordship likes surprises." And there it is, the first secret of the elite medieval kitchen. Food wasn't just nourishment, it was performance. These feasts weren't about flavor, they were about spectacle. Whole banquets built to astonish, to declare wealth and power, to make guests gasp even before their teeth touched anything. Mainstream historical fact. In the 14th and 15th centuries, noble households across Europe, especially in England and France, hosted subtleties. Elaborate edible sculptures made of sugar paste, marzipan, and colored dough, shaped into castles, saints, or scenes from battles. They often came with banners, trumpets, and a full narration before being ceremoniously cut and rarely eaten, because they tasted like sadness and dust. One man walks by carrying a platter the size of a wagon wheel. On it sits a peacock, feathers reattached after roasting, tail fanned, beak coated in gold. It looks alive, majestic, absurd. The smell, however, reminds you that it is very much deceased. You catch a glimpse of the Lord Steward entering, inspecting every dish as though it's a matter of state. It sort of is. Medieval feasts were political events in culinary disguise. You edge closer to a workbench where two cooks are furiously assembling what appears to be a pie fortress. Its crust towers in layers, reinforced with boiled dough walls filled not just with meat but with smaller pies, perception centuries before cinema. The older cook wipes his brow. "This will be sliced open at the table," he says, and he gestures with his hands. "Birds will fly out." You blink. "Live birds," he grins, "if they cooperate." Historians still argue whether these stunts were common or exaggerated by chroniclers, but some records do confirm live animal surprises baked under pie crusts or hidden inside hollowed loaves. A sort of medieval jump scare, but edible. You glance around again. The heat is suffocating, the air smells of fat, spice, and effort. The cooks themselves look half mad with exhaustion, yet their work is art. Over on the spice table sits a small locked chest, literally locked, with a key hanging around the master cook's neck. Inside, treasures: saffron, cloves, nutmeg, cinnamon, grains of paradise. You remember that one tiny pouch of saffron could cost more than a skilled laborer's annual wage. These cooks were handling gold disguised as powder. A young apprentice grinds almonds into paste with a heavy mortar, singing off-key. He adds rosewater and sugar, another luxury, and rolls the mixture into delicate shapes: birds, flowers, tiny crowns. You pick one up between your fingers. It's beautiful, almost too fragile to exist in this chaos. You nibble a corner and instantly regret it. The sweetness hits like a medieval sugar comet, followed by a hint of bitter almond. The apprentice laughs softly. "We make it for the eyes, not the tongue." That seems to be the theme here. Look rich, taste optional. The master cook strides past, barking for peacock eggs, which turn out to be goose eggs painted with crushed saffron for color. Another scullion is brushing pastries with molten honey to give them a mirror sheen. Two servants haul in a bucket of eels, alive and unimpressed with their fate. You watch one wriggle away across the floor like a slippery fugitive before someone snatches it up and tosses it back. The scene borders on absurd, yet it's mesmerizing. This is culinary theater where ingredients become metaphors. Food as symbolism, power, deception. You think of the peasants outside, eating pottage, hard bread, salted fish, and contrast it with the glittering absurdity here. All for a feast that might last one night, after which half the leftovers will spoil or feed the dogs or go to charity if the Lord wants to look pious. One of the cooks leans close to you, wiping his hands on his apron. "We make dishes they'll never finish," he says quietly. "Half the time the Lord barely eats, but they'll remember the sight of it." That hits you harder than you expect. These kitchens don't cook for hunger, they cook for memory. For gossip, for glory, for proof that one man's wealth could command nature itself. A loud clang interrupts your thoughts. Someone has just dropped a bronze dish filled with something gelatinous. It wobbles dangerously, holding its shape like it has opinions. "Jellied eel aspic," the cook shouts proudly. You're not sure if that's a dish or a threat. The smell of roasted venison joins the air, layered with cinnamon and pepper. Your senses start to blur. The room shimmers with heat. Someone brings in a towering confection, marzipan knights on horseback, poised for sugary combat. The detail is absurd, each horse's mane brushed with edible silver, the apprentice from earlier beams. 3 weeks' work, he whispers, chest puffed out. They'll eat it in 5 minutes. You can't help but admire the devotion. This isn't just food, it's ego sculpted in dough and gold. As the servants begin lining up dishes for transport to the great hall, you catch a glimpse beyond the kitchen door. Long tables draped in white linen, candlelight flickering across silver goblets, and lords already laughing, already drunk. The feast has begun. Music filters faintly through the air, but here in the kitchen, the music is the hiss of fire, the clang of ladles, the muttered curses of tired cooks. You realize something then. Behind every glamorous banquet, there's a small army of people sweating, shouting, bleeding, and burning themselves for beauty that isn't even meant for them. The head cook slaps your shoulder, smirks, and says, "Next time we'll make you turn the spit." You can't tell if that's a threat or a promotion. Either way, you nod, half dazed by the spectacle. As you leave the roaring kitchen, the smell of spice and roast clings to your hair. Somewhere behind you, the sound of laughter swells. The nobles will remember the peacock, the fortress pie, the glittering sugar nights. But the cooks, these hidden magicians of heat and hunger, will remember only the long night, the burned hands, and the quiet pride of having built a miracle from meat and smoke. You drift forward from the glow of the last kitchen fires, your steps carrying you into the market quarter as naturally as breath. No break, no reset, just the soft spill of story washing you into the next scene, one governed not by fire or feast but by aroma, and not the comforting sort either. This is the kind of scent that hits you first as a whisper, then as a promise, then as a challenge to your purse, your sanity, and your sense of financial priorities. Because here, in a cramped alley lined with merchant stalls still sticky from the day's chaos, you are about to learn just how ridiculous medieval spice prices could be. A breeze threads through the wooden booths, carrying notes so intoxicating you almost float after them. Cinnamon, saffron, cloves, pepper, even the faint sweetness of cardamom, rare, mystical, and wildly out of place next to a man selling chickens that look 2 days past fresh. You follow the trail to a small tent lit from within by golden lamplight. Its canvas flaps flutter like the silk of some exotic insect, and a merchant inside hums a tune with the confidence of someone who knows every coin in this kingdom will come crawling to him eventually. He spots you instantly. They always do. "Ah," he says, beckoning, "you smell the pepper, yes." You really do. It hits your nostrils like a polite punch. He sets a tiny wooden jar before you, so tiny it could disappear in your palm. "Enough here to buy a cow," he declares. "A healthy cow, one that gives milk." You glance from the jar to him, to the jar again. Sure, it smells nice, but cow prices, that feels like medieval inflation run amok. Still, the claim isn't far from truth. There's your mainstream historical fact for the section. Black pepper was so valuable in parts of medieval Europe that it was used as a form of currency, debt payment, and even rent. Imagine that, paying your landlord in peppercorns. You picture yourself dropping them one by one into a nobleman's hand while he nods like, "Yes, excellent, this is totally normal." The merchant gently shakes the jar, letting the tiny black spheres rattle like treasure. "This traveled farther than most kings," he says, "across deserts, seas, lands where a single grain spilled on the ground is mourned." You picture some weary traveler crawling across sand dunes, clutching a pouch of pepper like it contains the meaning of life. Honestly, it kind of did. He waves you closer. "Smell this." He lifts another jar, long, delicate, wrapped in cloth as though it's cold. When he opens it, a warm floral scent blooms out, soft as candlelight. "Saffron," he murmurs. You blink. That smell, it stirs something in you. Something old and sweet and faintly luxurious, the kind of scent that makes you think of velvet cushions and textiles dyed the color of sunrise. This isn't spice. This is magic. And it should be, because, fun quirky fact incoming, saffron harvested by hand requires about 150 flowers to make a gram. A single gram. By medieval standards, this made it more expensive than many precious metals, which is wild considering it just looks like little red threads that get caught in your fingernails. You ask the merchant why spices were so expensive, expecting something scholarly like trade monopolies or difficult terrain. Instead, he shrugs and says, "Everyone wants what they cannot have." Which, okay, fair, but also deeply unhelpful. He leans in conspiratorially. Historians still argue whether some nobles actually used spices in everyday cooking or merely displayed them on tables to show off. You imagine a noble household hosting a dinner. Guests, wow, what an extravagant feast. Lord of the manor, yes, yes, and here is my pepper, please admire it from a respectful distance. He directs you toward a tray holding cinnamon sticks. They're curled tight like the toes of someone wearing shoes 3 sizes too small. You pick one up, surprisingly heavy for its size. From Sri Lanka, he says, long journey. How long, you ask? He holds up one finger and twirls it dramatically. Many months by sea, then overland. Then someone bribes someone, someone steals from someone loses half the shipment, someone else finds it and sells it back. You know how trade goes. You absolutely do not know how trade goes. But the way he says it makes it sound like a medieval reality show you would binge watch way past bedtime. He continues, spice caravans crossed deserts where heat kills horses. Ships sank. Pirates stole everything. So if even a little bit reaches your table, he spreads his hands. You are lucky. Lucky or wealthy or both. You wander deeper into the tent, surrounded by wooden chests carved with floral patterns and iron fittings. Some are locked, some are chained. One even has a guard cat perched on top, a huge, solemn creature with one ear missing and an expression that says, "Try stealing saffron. See what happens." You admire its dedication. Medieval cats weren't here for cuddles. They were pest control, spice guardians, and occasionally the only thing standing between a merchant and financial ruin. You're drawn to a small bowl of cloves. They look familiar, too familiar. Those look like tiny nails, you say. They smell better than nails, the merchant replies. He's right. One sniff and your senses light up like festival torches. Cloves were used in everything from mulled wine to toothache remedies. Medieval cooks believed they warmed the body, balanced humors, and made food taste less like survival mush and more like something dignified. You sample a bit of mulled cider he's been warming over a brazier. The heat, the spice, the sweetness, it wraps around your tongue in a way that makes you understand why people would sell half their livelihood for this stuff. It's dangerously good. You sip again, too fast, the merchant coughs. Careful, that is expensive to drink greedily. You nod solemnly, aware that you've just consumed several medieval coins in a single gulp. Your whole financial future may be in that swallow. As you continue exploring, he introduces you to a world of spice fraud, because of course that existed. If something is worth more than a cow, someone will absolutely try to fake it. He shows you saffron threads tinted with beet juice, peppercorns made of clay, cinnamon bark soaked in cheap scent, and nutmeg shells filled with sawdust. You stare, people bought this. They didn't have your modern expectations, he says. If it smelled vaguely correct and didn't poison them immediately, what complaint could they make? Fair enough. Medieval Yelp reviews probably weren't a thing. He lifts a jar of ginger, light, sharp, tangy, bright. You inhale and feel instantly more awake, more alert. The merchant nods. You see why nobles added this to everything. Meat, porridge, sauces, even wine. At this point, medieval cuisine is sounding like one long gingerbread experiment. As you browse, he begins telling stories, half exaggerated, half true, all entertaining. About wealthy households that locked spices in special chests, about cooks who had to sign them out like dangerous weapons, about nobles gifting each other peppercorns the way modern friends might gift chocolates. You picture a medieval Christmas. Here, dear cousin, a quarter ounce of cinnamon. May it bring warmth to your home. Ah, thank you. And here, a tiny pinch of saffron because I like you marginally more than everyone else. You leave his tent, nose buzzing with aromas you didn't know existed outside holiday candles. The alley feels colder now, the world plainer after such sensory wealth. You realize something strange. For spices so costly, you've barely seen anyone actually eating them. Most medieval people couldn't afford them, and yet the desire, the fascination, the symbolism, they permeated everything. Spice wasn't just flavor, it was status, power, a glimpse of distant lands most people would never see. You glance back at the merchant, still humming, still polishing his jars like holy relics. He waves once knowingly, Come back when you have coin, he says, or a cow. You laugh quietly, because honestly he might not be joking. As you step into the cooling twilight, the lingering scent of cinnamon clings to your sleeve, warm and impossibly fragile. A reminder that in this world, the smallest things often cost the most. You leave the spice-laden alley behind, but the scents cling stubbornly to your clothing, trailing you like a mischievous shadow. Now, your path takes you toward another corner of medieval life that hums with quiet, slightly sticky anticipation. The realm of liquids. Not just any liquids, but the medieval obsession with fermented, brewed, and sweetened drinks that were at once life-sustaining, medicinal, and occasionally horrifying. You step into a small, low-ceilinged tavern tucked behind a timber-framed house. The air is warm, tinged with the sharp sweetness of honey, the earthy funk of ale, and a faint undertone of you're not entirely sure. Something vaguely medicinal, or maybe just old, fermented fruit that has seen one too many winters. The scent hits you like a curious slap, and before you can question your life choices, a stout woman with flour on her apron beckons you to a rough-hewn bench. Try something, she says, sliding a small wooden tankard toward you. The liquid inside is amber, thick with viscosity and glowing faintly in the dim candlelight. You lift it, sniff cautiously. Sweet, golden, possibly dangerous, likely delicious. It's mead, the drink of the gods, or at least the drink of anyone who could afford the honey. Medieval mead wasn't just a dessert beverage. It was potent, warming, sometimes spiced with cinnamon, cloves, or even herbs intended to heal your humors. Mainstream fact: honey was the primary sweetener before sugar became widespread in Europe, and mead was often safer to drink than water in areas where contamination was common. You sip. The warmth spreads immediately, a liquid hug that tickles your tongue and reminds you that sweetness is indeed a luxury. You swallow slowly. The taste is bright, fragrant, almost floral, but there's an undertone of "I could knock you over if I wanted to." Beside you, a young boy fills a mug with ale from a wooden barrel. He hands it to a monk in a plain brown robe. The monk inspects it with a mixture of suspicion and appreciation, then sips. Ale, unlike mead, was the staple. Ordinary people drank it morning, noon, and night. Historians still argue whether medieval ale was more nourishing than today's soft drinks. From what you've tasted, it might have been exactly that. Thick, yeasty, bitter, slightly sour. A liquid calorie bomb that doubled as hydration. You lift a small jug of something darker, almost opaque, handed to you by a grinning tavern keeper. Mulled ale, he says proudly, spiced, warms your soul, may also bring mild hallucinations. He winks. You stare. Hallucinations, he shrugs, depends on the yeast. You take a cautious sip and immediately taste cloves, cinnamon, and an almost herbal bitterness you can't identify. It's delicious, alarming, and slightly terrifying all at once. A fringe tidbit floats past your awareness. Some medieval drinkers actually added herbs like pennyroyal, wormwood, or even belladonna to ale or mead. Sometimes intentionally for flavor or medicine. Sometimes less intentionally. Imagine sipping a mild sedative in the middle of a bustling tavern and thinking, yeah, this is just my mid-afternoon refreshment. You try a bright golden-hued tonic poured from a thin glass vial. Honey, vinegar, and a blend of local herbs swirl together in a concoction that smells like an overambitious salad dressing. This is oximal, a medieval health drink intended to purify the body, soothe the throat, or prevent minor ailments. You tilt the vial. The liquid shivers. You sip. Sweet first, then tangy, then confusing. Your tongue tries to protest but gives up in resignation. Surprisingly, it's refreshing. Strange, yes, but oddly pleasant. From another table, you hear a commotion. A nobleman has spilled something dark and frothy over the edge of a trencher, splashing his sleeve. You glance over. His cup contains posset, a drink made from warm milk curdled with ale or wine, often flavored with sugar and spices. Sweet, tangy, and a little off-putting, it was a dessert and medicinal treat all in one. The Lord doesn't mind. He sips again and smiles like a man who understands the value of indulgence. You wander further, sampling as you go. Each drink is a story, a mixture of necessity and experimentation. Honey for sweetness, ale for sustenance, herbs for protection, vinegar for balance, and sometimes something suspicious. Perhaps a rogue leaf, a too strong fermentation, or an accidental dash of something toxic. You remind yourself, in a world before chemistry degrees, experimentation was hands-on and often slightly reckless. Yet as you sip, your senses sharpen. You start distinguishing flavors, however subtly. The bright floral notes in mead, the roasted bitterness in ale, the medicinal warmth in oxymel, the almost gamey tang of posset. You realize that medieval people were remarkably sophisticated in their drinking habits, even if their definitions of safe would make modern drinkers nervous. Historians still argue whether some of these beverages were primarily health aids or indulgent treats, but it's clear. Drinking in the Middle Ages was an experience, a ritual, a necessity, and occasionally a gamble. The tavern keeper leans in, eyes twinkling. If you want to survive a medieval night, he says, you learn which drinks to trust, which to admire, and which to sip only in tiny amounts while praying to Saint whatever. You laugh softly, lifting a final tankard of honeyed ale. It's thick, golden, and entirely too potent. As the warmth spreads through your chest, you realize something crucial. In this world of bread, pottage, feasts, and spices, liquid sustenance is both a comfort and a challenge, a reminder that taste and danger were inseparable companions. And as you lean back against the wooden bench, savoring the mix of sweetness, spice, and yeast, you can't help but feel a little braver and a little more suspicious of the next drink you encounter. You push open the tavern door and step back into the cooler evening air, your fingers still sticky from the honeyed ale. Ahead, a narrow lane leads you toward the comforting smell of fresh-baked bread, that unmistakable aroma that could make even the weariest medieval traveler feel whole again. Unlike pottage or extravagant feasts, bread was everywhere, ubiquitous, necessary, and surprisingly versatile. But behind each loaf, there were secrets only the bakers knew. You enter a small, bustling bakery tucked between timbered houses. The warm, yeasty air wraps around you like a soft cloak. Women and men move with a rhythm that's both precise and instinctive, kneading, folding, shaping, and scoring dough as if it possesses a life of its own. Long wooden paddles slide in and out of the blazing oven, extracting loaves that glow golden, their crusts crackling like tiny bonfires. You approach the counter where a stout baker greets you. "Ever smelled a loaf rising properly?" he asks, eyes gleaming. You shake your head. He lifts a ball of dough, soft and supple. "This is magic," he whispers. "Not just flour and water, time, heat, patience, and a little secret of mine." Mainstream historical fact hits you. Medieval bakers often guarded their starter yeast like treasure, passing it down through generations. A lost starter could mean months of work wasted and ruinous loss of income. You realize the secret the baker mentions is likely this very starter, a living culture that transforms simple ingredients into life-giving sustenance. He smiles slyly. Some say adding a touch of beer or whey gives the loaf a certain personality. You glance at the stacked trays of fragrant bread, round boule, long baguette-like sticks, braided loaves, even small sweetened rolls sprinkled with dried fruits. Each seems to carry its own character, a tiny identity forged in fire and flour. A quirky tidbit floats through your awareness. In some medieval towns, bakers would sometimes hide small charms, herbs, or even coins inside loaves, either to bring luck or occasionally to prank an unsuspecting customer. You imagine biting into a loaf only to find a tiny iron coin waiting for you. Painful, probably. Memorable, definitely. You take a seat near a work table as the baker demonstrates scoring techniques, lines, crosses, symbols etched into dough before baking. Historians still argue whether some patterns were purely decorative or meant to convey spiritual protection. Either way, they create a fascinating visual language, a map of craftsmanship, intention, and superstition baked into each loaf. A young apprentice hands you a fragrant roll, warm from the oven. You take a cautious bite. The crust shatters delicately under your teeth, giving way to a soft, tender interior. Sweetness from a pinch of honey plays against the faint tang of fermentation. You marvel at how something so humble can evoke such complexity. The baker leans back, wiping flour from his hands. Bread is honest, he says. It feeds, it comforts, it sustains. And yet, he gestures toward the sweeter, more elaborate loaves on the counter. It can delight, surprise, even shame you if you eat too quickly. Nearby, a small tray of pastries, curiously shaped like animals and tiny hats, catches your eye. You ask what they are. Festival treats, the baker explains. Shaped for celebrations or saints' days, sweet, sometimes spiced, rarely eaten by peasants, mostly for display and indulgence. The air hums with warmth and life. You watch the apprentice dust a loaf with flour, then add a delicate sprinkle of caraway seeds. The aroma rises immediately, grounding the bakery in an earthy, aromatic reality that no feast or spice market can rival. You realize that bread in the medieval world was a cornerstone of existence, simple, complex, and endlessly adaptable. You step closer to the ovens, peering into their fiery mouths. Shadows dance along the walls, thrown by flames that seem to move with intention. Each loaf emerges with a personality, each score and shape telling a story. Survival, celebration, or just plain hunger. You bite another piece of warm bread, and it's grounding, earthy, perfect in its imperfection. For a fleeting moment, you understand why bakers were so revered and sometimes feared. They held the power to sustain or starve, to delight or disappoint. Their knowledge of fermentation, heat, and secret ingredients gave them authority that transcended simple cooking. Bread was the invisible thread running through every meal, every feast, every life. And as you savor the last bite, the baker nods knowingly, almost conspiratorially. Remember, he says, the loaf speaks if you listen. Every rise, every crack, every scent, it's a story. You just have to pay attention. You leave the bakery behind, the warm, yeasty aroma still clinging faintly to your fingers, and step into the cooler, damper air of the outer storage areas. Here, in the shadows of the castle and village, the less glamorous but absolutely essential work of food preservation unfolds. No feasts, no luxurious spices, just the relentless, necessary battle against rot, hunger, and time itself. Barrels, bins, and sacks are stacked in neat, odor-filled rows. The air smells sharp, brine, smoke, fermenting vegetables, and the earthy tang of root crops. This is where medieval cooks wrestled with the fundamental question of survival, how to make a meal last long enough to bridge the seasons. Without refrigeration, every technique was a gamble, and every preserved morsel a triumph. A middle-aged woman tends to a stack of salted herring, rubbing layers of coarse salt into the fish with practiced efficiency. Salt, she explains without looking up, is the blood of preservation. She sprinkles it generously, patting the fish as though it's a sleeping child. Mainstream fact: salt was critical in medieval Europe, used to preserve fish and meat, and in some regions, salt even shaped local economies, acting as a form of currency. Nearby, a small smokehouse exudes thick, curling tendrils of blue-gray smoke. Inside, hams hang like ornaments, absorbing the dense aroma of smoldering oak chips. You watch as a young boy adds more wood to the fire. The cook instructs him in a tone both firm and soothing. Too much smoke, you ruin the taste. Too little and you risk rot. Patience is the spice you cannot buy. A quirky tidbit rises in your mind. In some regions, it was believed that smoking meat over particular woods, juniper, oak, or applewood, could ward off evil spirits. Whether superstition or taste, it shaped the smell and flavor of medieval kitchens. And yes, historians still argue whether these rituals were primarily practical, symbolic, or both. You move to a large wooden barrel where cabbage is being carefully layered with salt for sauerkraut. Each leaf is pressed down methodically, ensuring air bubbles are expelled. The fermenting smell is sharp, almost acrid, but you catch a faint sweetness underneath. It's a reminder that preservation is also alchemy, turning something ordinary into something nourishing and sometimes magical. Over in a corner, sacks of grains are carefully stored on raised platforms to avoid dampness and pests. Rodents, after all, are an ever-present concern, and the medieval pantry is a battlefield of vigilance and cunning. You notice a small cat curling around a stack of flour sacks, its eyes narrow, tail flicking. The cat is both companion and security system. You remember the spice merchant's feline guard, and the pattern emerges. Animals were stealthy, silent, indispensable helpers in human survival. A man slices smoked sausages, setting them atop wooden boards for storage. The smell is intoxicating, oily, and savory. You nibble a small piece, cautious of the salt. It's robust and hearty, designed not for indulgence but for longevity. It's also practical. Salted, smoked, or dried foods could accompany soldiers on campaigns, travelers on long roads, or peasants through the lean months. Barrels of pickled vegetables, carrots, turnips, and onions line another wall. Vinegar preserves and flavors simultaneously, a dual-purpose miracle of medieval ingenuity. You lift a small piece of carrot, crunching it carefully. Sour, tangy, satisfying in its simplicity. You realize that much of what you consider basic survival skill, pickling, salting, smoking, is really culinary science before the term existed. You wander further and spy honey jars tucked high on shelves. Honey, like salt, is both sweetener and preservative. A single pot can maintain fruits, nuts, or even small cakes for months. You dip a finger in, savor the golden stickiness. Its flavor is unchanging, pure, eternal in a way that bread, ale, or vegetables cannot always promise. Historians still debate whether medieval households universally mastered preservation techniques, or whether success was regional and dependent on resources. But the evidence is clear. Those who learned these skills survived better, feasted better, and occasionally delighted in rare treats that had traveled through months of careful storage. You watch as the workers, men, women, and children, move in rhythm, each motion purposeful, layering, salting, smoking, stirring, sealing. The quiet hum of labor fills the space. It's not glamorous, it's not showy, but it's life itself distilled into repeated gestures that protect against hunger, decay, and forgetfulness. You run your hand along a barrel of pickled turnips, feeling the cool, rough wood. You inhale deeply. The smells, the textures, the subtle promise of nourishment, they are the heartbeat of survival. Here in the shadows, centuries of experience and instinct converge, quietly dictating what lives and what rots, who thrives and who starves. And as you step back, leaving the smoke, salt, and fermenting vegetables behind, you understand a truth that underpins everything you've seen. While feasts dazzle, spices amaze, and drinks intoxicate, preservation is what sustains life, generation to generation. You exit the storage areas, the scent of smoke and salt lingering faintly on your clothes, and move toward a smaller, quieter corner of medieval sustenance. The pantry's hidden treasures. Here, among barrels of ale, sacks of grain, and jars of honey, lie the sweet, fragrant delights that made life a little less grim for those who could afford them, or a rare luxury for those who could not. A long wooden table stretches before you, piled with baskets of dried fruits, figs, raisins, dates, and apricots, their colors ranging from sun-drenched gold to deep, rich purples. You pick one up, a wrinkled raisin, small yet potent, and bite gently. Sugar may have been scarce and expensive, but dried fruits captured and condensed nature's sweetness, turning mere sustenance into a moment of indulgence. Mainstream fact: dried fruits were imported from the Mediterranean and the Near East, and were considered luxurious additions to meals, often appearing in pies, pottages, or desserts for nobility. Next to the fruits sit nuts, still in their shells: almonds, walnuts, hazelnuts, and pine nuts. Their earthy scent contrasts sharply with the sugar-laced sweetness of the fruits. You crack a walnut, releasing a fragrance that's almost woodsy, rich, and buttery. These were energy-rich snacks, perfect for long journeys or a bite between more substantial meals. A quirky tidbit: Some medieval households believed walnuts and almonds carried symbolic meanings, walnuts for wisdom, almonds for fertility, which occasionally dictated their placement at feasts or festivals. A small, ornate box catches your eye. Inside lie candied fruits preserved in honey and dusted with fine sugar. You pick up a tiny cube of candied orange peel. The sweetness is intense, almost aggressive, but balanced by a slight bitterness. Someone nearby explains, almost conspiratorially, that these treats were considered medicinal as well as indulgent. Honey preserved the fruit and was thought to soothe digestion, while the sugar itself, rare, costly, and imported, was a status symbol. Historians still argue whether these sweets were primarily enjoyed or used to display wealth. Regardless, you cannot help but imagine a noble child sneaking a candied fig from the pantry, eyes wide with forbidden delight. You wander toward jars of preserves, quince paste, apple butter, and cherry conserve. They glisten under the candlelight, thick, dark, and richly aromatic. You dip a finger into a jar of cherry conserve and taste the syrupy tang. You can see how these preserves could transform ordinary bread into a dessert worthy of a feast. In some households, sugar and preserves were reserved exclusively for the elite. In others, special occasions justified their occasional appearance for common folk. On a small shelf, you notice spiced nuts, coated with honey, cinnamon, and even a hint of pepper. You pick one up, rolling it between your fingers. The combination of sweet, spice, and warmth hits immediately. You can see why medieval cooks loved this approach. It turned simple, ordinary ingredients into layered sensory experiences. A faint smirk crosses your face as you imagine someone from centuries past thinking, how daring is it to combine sugar and pepper? Nearby, a crate holds citrus fruits, most of them oranges and lemons imported from the south. The scent alone is intoxicating, a sharp, fragrant brightness that slices through the heavier aromas of the pantry. You pick up an orange, feeling its weight, imagining the weeks it took to transport it safely from groves in distant lands. The expense, effort, and rarity make each bite feel monumental. A child scurries past you, holding a small basket of almonds. You watch them scamper back toward the kitchen, thinking about how even the simplest nuts were coveted treats. Every bite a story, every flavor a reminder of distance, trade, and human ingenuity. You glance around the pantry, noticing small jars of preserves tucked between barrels and baskets. Herbs and flowers are mixed in rosewater, violets, and mint, adding subtle complexity to the sweetness. One jar of candied rose petals is so delicate that you almost hesitate to touch it. You wonder how many hands have prepared it, infused it with sugar, and stored it with care, only for it to be consumed in seconds during a feast or festival. There's something quietly enchanting about the pantry. It is less dramatic than the kitchens, less fragrant than the spice stalls, and certainly less intoxicating than the tavern. Yet it feels intensely personal, intimate, and alive with small, edible wonders. Each fruit, nut, and sweet preserves a fragment of seasons past, distant lands, and human effort. As you leave, the warm sense of honey, sugar, and dried fruit cling to you, a reminder of the small joys that sustained and delighted medieval people across social classes. You realize that while bread feeds, spices impress, and alcohol entertains, these humble treasures are a quiet testament to ingenuity, indulgence, and the human craving for sweetness in life. You step out of the pantry and find yourself drawn toward the rustic hum of the dairy corner, where milk, cheese, and other dairy products form a cornerstone of medieval nutrition. The smells here are distinct, tangy, rich, sometimes sharp enough to make your nose wrinkle, yet utterly compelling. It's a world of flavors and textures that could comfort, surprise, or even slightly alarm the unwary taster. A low wooden table holds bowls of fresh milk, some thickened into cream, others separated for butter making. A woman stirs curds gently, humming under her breath. The rhythm of her motion is steady, almost hypnotic. Mainstream historical fact. In the Middle Ages, dairy was often more reliable than water, as milk was boiled or fermented, making it safer to consume in a world without modern sanitation. You watch as she ladles whey from one pot into another, the thin liquid sliding silently like pale sunlight. Nearby, cheeses of every imaginable type are stacked on shelves. Hard, soft, blue-veined, smoked, and even slightly crumbly varieties. Their aromas range from mild and milky to pungent and daring, like scents designed to test your courage as much as your appetite. A peculiar tidbit: some medieval cheeses were rubbed with wine, herbs, or ashes to encourage specific molds, creating textures and flavors that modern eaters might find eccentric or horrifying. A small boy holds a fresh cheese wheel, rolling it carefully across a plank to avoid cracks. You notice a peculiar one, blackened slightly on the edges. "Ah," the cheesemaker says, noticing your gaze. "That's a traditional ash-coated cheese. Preserves it longer and keeps insects away. Also, it looks fancy." You nod, imagining medieval guests delicately slicing through the soft, gray rind, wondering whether the black powder is decoration or culinary hazard. You dip a finger into a pot of thick, sweetened cream, tasting its mild richness. This was often served as a dessert base, thickened with egg yolks, honey, or spices. In wealthy households, cream might be whipped into foams or custards, a delicate counterpart to the hearty breads, meats, and pies of the main meal. A curious aroma draws your attention next, a tangy, almost sour smell. You follow it to a small jar labeled buttermilk. Drinking it is an experience, slightly sour, slightly sweet, and entirely invigorating. You recall a fringe fact: buttermilk was believed to help digestion, cool the body, and even protect against certain illnesses. Historians still argue whether its medicinal reputation was more superstition or empirical observation, but either way, it was widely consumed. Nearby, a few small bowls of curds are being flavored with herbs and a pinch of salt. You taste a bite, the tang of the curd balanced by the faint herbal notes. It's astonishing how such a simple combination could delight the senses. You think back to the bakery, the pantry, the tavern, and realize that dairy, while humble, had an elegance all its own. It was versatility embodied, nourishment, flavor, and preservation wrapped into one category of food. The cheesemaker gestures toward a tall shelf holding wheels of hard cheese, sometimes aged for months or even years. You admire the patience required. Unlike bread, which demands quick timing and fleeting attention, cheese is slow, deliberate, and unforgiving. Miss the moment and a batch might turn brittle, moldy, or dangerously off. Yet perfect it, and you have a product that lasts, feeds, and impresses simultaneously. In one corner, you notice something unexpected: a small jar of curdled milk infused with herbs and spices. The smell is sharp, almost medicinal, but intriguing. The cheesemaker leans in. This is for the more adventurous palate or the one that seeks health remedies. Used carefully, it can soothe the stomach, invigorate the body, or challenge it. You chuckle nervously, sipping a tiny amount. Surprisingly, it's oddly refreshing. A tangy, herbal jolt that makes you feel alive and slightly skeptical of your life choices. You wander among the shelves, tasting, sniffing, and observing. Each cheese, milk, or dairy preparation tells a story of care, attention, and experimentation. Flavor, preservation, and presentation merge seamlessly. You begin to understand why dairy was such an essential and revered part of medieval kitchens, appearing in both everyday sustenance and ceremonial feasts. As you step away, the rich, tangy aroma lingers, and you feel a newfound appreciation for this world of curds, creams, and cheeses. It's nourishing, practical, and occasionally daring. A reminder that medieval cooks were not only creative but endlessly inventive with the simplest ingredients. You leave the comforting world of dairy behind, stepping into the robust, raw, and sometimes overwhelming realm of medieval meat and game. The air is heavier here, thick with the rich scent of roasting, curing, and occasionally something that makes you wrinkle your nose. Welcome to the domain where survival, skill, and spectacle intersect. The butchers, hunters, and cooks who transformed living beasts into feasts worthy of kings and peasants alike. The first thing that strikes you is the variety. Hanging from hooks and laid across tables are cuts of pork, beef, venison, and mutton. The colors range from deep ruby red to pale pink, some glistening with fat, others mottled with curring salt. A pig's head sits proudly atop a chopping block, its eyes eerily lifelike, the snout perfectly round. You shudder slightly, reminding yourself that presentation mattered in medieval kitchens almost as much as flavor. A butcher waves you over. Ever wonder why meat smells this way? He asks. It's not decay, it's character. Each cut tells a story. Mainstream fact. Butchering was a highly skilled craft, often involving knowledge of anatomy, curing, and preservation. In many towns, only licensed butchers could sell meat. You nod, watching as he deftly slices a haunch of venison, the knife moving with a practiced rhythm that almost seems like dancing. Nearby, a small table holds game birds, pheasants, partridges, and even the occasional swan. A cook adds herbs and spices, rubbing the skin until it glistens. You can see the careful attention to flavor, an effort to mask gaminess, enhance taste, and impress the diners who might never have seen such delicacies outside a noble banquet hall. A quirky tidbit. Some medieval households preserved birds in fat or even honey for extended storage, creating both a culinary and visual spectacle. You notice a small, tightly bound parcel and ask what it contains. The butcher smiles. Blood pudding, not everyone's favorite but a delicacy, uses what would otherwise go to waste. Resourceful, efficient, and full of flavor. You take a tentative sniff. Rich, metallic, slightly sweet. You think back to your mead tasting and wonder how medieval people developed such adventurous palates. Historians still argue whether dishes like blood pudding were primarily survival foods or intentional gourmet choices. But either way, they persisted. A couple of hunters arrive with freshly caught hare and a few pheasants. They discuss the meat with a sort of reverence, noting the animal's age, fat content, and even hunting method. You're reminded that medieval cuisine was tightly connected to the land and season. Fresh game was prized not only for taste, but for its symbolic connection to status, skill, and nature. You follow the butcher to a small smokehouse, where cured hams hang like pendants, their surfaces darkened and fragrant. He explains the process. Salt, smoke, patience. Some hams take months, even a year. Fail and it's a tragedy. Succeed and you have a treasure. The slow process ensures safety, flavor, and preservation, yet it requires intuition, attention, and hands-on experience that modern cooks often overlook. Your gaze drifts to a curious contraption, a series of hooks and frames holding intestines, tripe, and other offal. The butcher chuckles at your expression. Every part has a purpose. Sausages, pies, stews, nothing wasted. Medieval kitchens didn't have the luxury of ignoring scraps. You imagine a cook carefully crafting sausage, balancing fat, spice, and filler to produce something both nourishing and flavorful, a culinary puzzle solved over centuries. Nearby, a nobleman inspects a hanging venison leg. He rubs it with herbs, sniffing delicately, as if evaluating the animal's soul as much as its taste. You can almost see the politics of meat here. Ownership, display, and skill in preparation all mingling with flavor. The extravagance, the patience, and the knowledge required underscore why medieval feasts were so revered. You spot a young apprentice carefully carving a small wild boar, muttering encouragements. There's something almost ritualistic in the way he handles the knife, the meat, and the fat. It's messy, practical, and oddly beautiful, a choreography of survival and indulgence. And as you step back, taking in the rows of meats, the hanging game, the smoke, and the spice-infused cuts, you realize meat in medieval kitchens was more than sustenance. It was power, identity, and creativity, demanding both respect and courage from those who handled it. You breathe deeply, inhaling the warm, iron-rich aroma that fills the hall, and sense the quiet skill, history, and adventure embedded in every haunch, every bird, every carefully cured sausage. Survival, flavor, and tradition converge here in ways that continue to fascinate centuries later. You leave the meat hall behind, the lingering aroma of cured hams and roasting game fatting from your senses, and move toward a long, low room that hums with gentle, bubbling activity. Here, in pots that clang softly against wooden tables and hearthstones, simmer the pottages and stews that formed the backbone of medieval diets. This is where practicality meets flavor, where resourcefulness reigns supreme, and where a single pot could sustain a household for days. You approach the central hearth, where a large iron cauldron rocks slightly over a low fire. The liquid within hisses and sighs as vegetables, grains, and meat mingle in a fragrant, slowly thickening broth. Mainstream historical fact: pottage was a staple in medieval Europe, eaten by peasants and nobility alike, varying in ingredients depending on season, region, and social status. The simplicity belied the subtlety. The combination of herbs, vegetables, and sometimes small amounts of meat could produce a depth of flavor that surprised the uninitiated. A cook ladles a spoonful into a wooden bowl and hands it to you. The aroma rises instantly: earthy roots, a faint tang from fermented grains, a whisper of herbs that tickle your nose. You sip carefully. Warm, hearty, and comforting, but with layers of unexpected complexity. It's nourishment and subtle pleasure wrapped in one. Nearby, another pot bubbles with a slightly thicker stew. Carrots, onions, leeks, and chunks of salted pork swim together in a golden broth. You notice something unusual: a few dried plums floating lazily on the surface. A quirky tidbit: medieval cooks often added dried fruits, honey, or even wine to savory dishes to create a subtle balance of sweet and sour flavors. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread practice, or mostly confined to wealthier households experimenting with new tastes. You lean closer to a smaller pot simmering on the edge of the hearth. Its contents smell faintly medicinal, a combination of herbs, roots, and grains meant to fortify the body. Some pottages were crafted specifically as health remedies, believed to regulate humors, ease digestion, or prevent illness. The line between food and medicine often blurred, making each meal a potential act of care or an experiment in subtle flavor. You watch an apprentice add a pinch of salt to a bubbling pot, then stir in a sprig of fresh thyme. The aroma shifts instantly, the subtle herbaceous note threading through the earthy base. You realize that pottage, while humble, relied on an understanding of balance: sweetness, salt, bitterness, and aroma, all contributing to a meal that was more than the sum of its ingredients. Across the room, a few large cauldrons hold more extravagant pottages, intended for the upper table. Here, chunks of veal, fish, and even small game mingle with saffron, pepper, and occasionally exotic spices. You can't help but recall the spice market from earlier, imagining how each precious pinch elevated the humble pot to something worthy of admiration. A small wooden ladle dips into a particularly thick stew. You taste. The base of barley and beans is familiar, comforting, while a faint tang of vinegar or fermented liquid gives it a lively brightness. The flavors are simple yet nuanced, a testament to the skill and patience of the cook. You remember the earlier discussion about preservation. Pottages were often reheated multiple times, allowing flavors to deepen and meld, creating richness from ingredients that might otherwise seem ordinary. A young girl stirs a small pot of lentils, humming softly. You catch the slight sweetness of onions and the earthy punch of herbs. Even in its simplicity, the dish feels intentional, cared for. You realize that for peasants, stews were a daily ritual, a shared comfort that connected family, community, and the rhythms of the seasons. Nearby, a noble's cauldron is tended with a different kind of care. The addition of spices, meats, and rare vegetables transforms the one-pot meal into an almost ceremonial act, showcasing wealth, taste, and the artistry of the kitchen staff. You note the contrast: humble pottage for nourishment, elaborated pottage for display. Both are essential to the medieval culinary ecosystem, each with its place and purpose. As you step back, inhaling the rich, mingling scents of the hearth, you understand the power of the one-pot wonder. Pottage and stew were sustenance, science, art, and social commentary all simmering together. Every bubble, every stir, every spice tells a story of adaptation, ingenuity, and flavor, of life lived in warmth and practicality, yet never without a touch of creativity. You leave the cauldrons to their gentle simmer, the scent of cooked vegetables and herbs lingering like a memory, a reminder that even the simplest meals hold secrets, care, and the heartbeat of medieval life. You step away from the bubbling cauldrons, leaving the smell of simmering vegetables and rich broths behind, and enter the realm of medieval pies and pastries. Here, the focus shifts from sustenance to creativity, craftsmanship, and sometimes spectacle. The air is dense with the buttery, sweet, and occasionally savory aroma of baked wonders, a tantalizing mix that promises both indulgence and astonishment. A long wooden table stretches before you, piled high with pies of every conceivable shape and size. Round, square, and triangular, some brimming with meats and vegetables, others with fruits and custards. Each crust seems to hold a secret. You pick up a small, delicately fluted pie, feeling its firm but tender crust. Mainstream historical fact: medieval pies often used thick, sturdy crusts, sometimes called coffins, that protected the filling during long cooking times and could even be inedible in themselves. The crust was a vessel, a protective shell, and sometimes more practical than delicious. A cook brushes the surface of a large, elaborate pie with beaten egg, giving it a golden sheen. Inside, chunks of venison, pork, and aromatic herbs wait to meld into a savory feast. The technique is precise, scoring the top, sealing the edges, layering flavors. You notice small, whimsical shapes, birds, leaves, geometric designs pressed into the crust. A quirky tidbit: medieval bakers sometimes crafted pies in intricate shapes to impress guests, conceal the ingredients, or display the household's wealth. Historians still argue whether these forms were primarily decorative, symbolic, or just playful experimentation. Nearby, a tray of sweet pastries tempts you. Spiced apple tarts, honeyed almond cakes, and delicate custard-filled treats beckon. You pick up a small tart, inhaling the scent of cinnamon and cloves. It's rich, fragrant, and surprisingly sophisticated for such humble ingredients. You remember the spice market and the rarity of sugar. These tiny pastries are more than indulgence. They are status, culture, and careful calculation baked into edible form. A young apprentice demonstrates the art of lattice work, weaving thin strips of dough over a fruit filling. The pattern is almost hypnotic. You try to mimic it but fail spectacularly, laughing softly at the delicate precision required. You realize that medieval pastries demanded dexterity, patience, and imagination, skills cultivated over years, not minutes. You wander over to a table of trenchers, thick slices of bread hollowed and filled with meats, pies, or stews. Often, these were served at feasts, allowing guests to eat directly from the bread vessel. A small spiced pie rests atop one. You bite cautiously. The bread is dense, the filling rich, the spices subtle but effective. A culinary hybrid, part container, part meal, part showpiece. Nearby, you notice a particularly bizarre creation, a pie shaped like a swan, complete with dough feathers and an almond-studded beak. The cook winks. "For the Lord's table," she says. A bit of fun, a bit of status, a bit of culinary trickery. You marvel at the effort. Dough, filling, spices, and the magic of illusion all come together in one baked masterpiece. Historians still debate whether the extravagant pies of noble kitchens influenced common cooking or existed purely as ceremonial displays. Either way, you sense the artistry involved. Pastry, after all, was a medium where imagination, skill, and ingredients intersected, a canvas for cooks to showcase prowess, creativity, and taste. As you move along, tasting a small custard tart and inhaling the sweet, warm aroma, you notice a quiet rhythm: rolling, filling, folding, pressing. Each pie, tart, or pastry is a story, a microcosm of ingenuity and desire. They are practical, nourishing, beautiful, and occasionally whimsical, a testament to the medieval understanding that food can delight as much as it sustains. And as you leave the pastry table, crumbs on your fingers and the scent of baked butter in your hair, you understand. Medieval pies and pastries are edible architecture, a marriage of flavor, function, and fantasy, revealing the playful and sophisticated mind of the cook behind the crust. You step outside the quieter kitchens and pantries, leaving behind the scent of pastries, pies, and simmering pottages, and find yourself in a bright, bustling courtyard alive with the sounds and smells of a medieval festival. Here, food transcends necessity and enters the realm of spectacle. Long tables groan under platters, cauldrons bubble, and the air is electric with anticipation, chatter, and the occasional squawk from a poultry pen. A nobleman gestures toward an enormous table, lined with roasted meats, pies, fruits, and exotic spices. You approach, taking in the visual feast. Mainstream historical fact: medieval festivals often showcased culinary abundance as a symbol of wealth, power, and generosity, with elaborate displays designed to impress both locals and visiting dignitaries. Even the layout of the table, the arrangement of dishes, and the decorative garnishes were part of the performance. You notice a small group of cooks bringing forward a massive swan pie, its dough crust sculpted into lifelike feathers, gilded lightly with egg wash. Nearby, another team rolls in a meat mountain, a towering display of spiced hams, sausages, and game, stacked carefully to awe and intimidate. A quirky tidbit: some feast organizers went so far as to theatrically reveal pies containing live birds or small creatures, designed to surprise, amuse, or even shock guests. Historians still debate how common these theatrical culinary tricks truly were, but the idea persists in recipes and accounts of grand banquets. You drift past a table laden with desserts, sugared almonds, candied fruits, and jewel-toned pastries that glimmer like gemstones in the sunlight. The scents of cinnamon, rosewater, and honey mingle with the smokiness of roasted meats. Children run between tables, stealing tiny tastes where they can. You smile, remembering the tiny candied figs from the pantry, imagining the delight of a child sneaking sweets at a grand feast. A minstrel plucks a lute nearby, and you notice that the rhythm of the music seems synchronized with the movement of the servers and cooks, creating an almost theatrical choreography. The feast is as much performance as it is meal. Dishes are not only to be eaten, they are to be seen, admired, and remembered. You observe a table where an apprentice presents small pies shaped like birds, fishes, and heraldic symbols. Each is carefully crafted, meant to impress the lord or lady of the manor. The artistry rivals the taste, reminding you that medieval cooks were not just providers of sustenance, they were visual storytellers. A large cauldron of spiced wine, glimmering red in the afternoon sun, invites you to take a sip. Sweet, warm, and gently intoxicating, it's a reminder that drinks too were part of the festival theater, elevating ordinary ingredients into a sensory spectacle. You recall the mead, ale, and oxymels from earlier, noticing how even liquids could participate in this blend of flavor, status, and ritual. You wander among the tables, noticing subtle social cues: which dishes are reserved for nobles, which are offered to guests of honor, and which scraps are intentionally left for commoners. Food is status, communication, and control, all intertwined. Even something as simple as a roasted fowl or a layered pie conveys hierarchy, taste, and sophistication. Historians still argue whether these elaborate feasts influenced everyday cooking or remained isolated celebrations, but walking through the courtyard, observing the sights, smells, and structured chaos, you understand the magnetic pull. Feasts were education, indulgence, and theater all at once, teaching etiquette, taste, and social structure through the medium of food. As the sun lowers, casting golden light across the tables and tents, you take a deep breath. The scents of honeyed pastries, spiced meats, roasted game, and rich wine blend into a heady symphony. You realize that while everyday cooking nourishes, festival feasts celebrate, dazzle, and transform the act of eating into an unforgettable sensory journey. You leave the festival behind, the laughter, music, and savory sweet scents lingering like a memory, and step into a quieter space where the true heart of medieval cooking, the recipes themselves, awaits your attention. This is the realm of scribes, household stewards, and inquisitive cooks who documented, adapted, and sometimes lost the very essence of flavor across generations. A worn, leather-bound manuscript lies open before you, its pages yellowed, edges frayed, ink faded in places. You lean closer and trace the words: recipes for pottages, pies, preserves, and spiced meats. Mainstream historical fact: many medieval recipes were recorded in household books, monasteries, or merchant ledgers, often with vague instructions like cook until done or season to taste, leaving modern cooks to guess proportions, timing, and even ingredients. You smile, realizing how much improvisation, intuition, and experience were required to bring these dishes to life. A small jar of saffron, a pinch of pepper, a sprig of rosemary. These fragments of ingredients seem almost sacred. You recall the spice merchants and the long, perilous journey spices made from distant lands to arrive here, shaping flavor and social distinction along the way. A quirky tidbit floats through your mind. Some recipes call for obscure additions like rosewater, violets, or even crushed pearls, meant to impress diners with exoticism rather than enhance taste. Historians still argue how widespread these curious ingredients truly were versus being symbolic or ceremonial. You flip the page, encountering a section on meat pies filled with minced game and dried fruits. You notice a faint annotation in the margin: use what the season allows and cook with care. It's a reminder that medieval cooking was adaptive, responsive to the natural world, and deeply connected to seasonal rhythms. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was entirely predictable. Nearby, a small kitchen setup allows you to attempt one of these recipes, cautiously measuring, blending, and shaping. You mix flour, butter, and water for a pie crust, remembering the baker's secrets from long ago. You fold in roasted meats, herbs, and a few dried fruits, feeling the continuum between past and present as your hands work. The aroma rises, faint at first, then intoxicating, like a whisper from centuries past. You pause, savoring a memory of each kitchen, pantry, and feast you visited. The pungent smoke of cured hams, the gentle sweetness of honeyed pastries, the comforting aroma of pottages, all converge in a tapestry of smell, taste, and technique. Each recipe you attempt carries forward a fragment of history, a story embedded in flavor, method, and care. Historians still debate the origins of many dishes, the authenticity of surviving recipes, and the degree to which improvisation shaped outcomes. Yet there's an undeniable continuity. The desire to nourish, delight, and celebrate through food transcends time. Every forgotten recipe, every scribbled instruction, every curious ingredient is a voice reaching across centuries, inviting you to taste, imagine, and continue the story. As you set down the pie, its crust golden and fragrant, you realize that medieval cooking is not merely a study of the past. It's a living heritage, techniques, flavors, and traditions waiting to be rediscovered and savored anew. These recipes, once lost or neglected, whisper to us today, reminding us of creativity, resilience, and the joy of sharing food. You close the manuscript gently, inhaling deeply. The scents, flavors, and images of the medieval kitchen linger in your mind, a comforting and tantalizing echo. You feel a sense of completion, yet also a sense of continuity, as if the story of food, flavor, and human ingenuity stretches endlessly forward, waiting for curious hands and eager palates. The kitchens grow quiet now, the fire embers softening to a gentle glow. You settle into the memory of each smell, taste, and texture, letting the warmth of baked bread, the sweetness of honey, and the smoky richness of cured meats drift slowly through your mind. Outside, the festival has ended, but the echoes of laughter, music, and clinking dishes continue to hum softly. You remember the meticulous bakers, the careful butchers, the inventive cooks crafting pies, pottages, and pastries. Each hand, each tool, each ingredient was part of a rhythm that wove daily life and celebration together. The medieval kitchen, once bustling with urgency, now lives quietly in your imagination, offering nourishment not only to the body but to curiosity, memory, and imagination alike. Take a moment to feel the seasons. the harvest fruits drying in the sun, the cool cellars lined with barrels, the winter smoke curling from chimneys. The flavors, scents, and textures of centuries past linger, not as distant echoes but as gentle companions, reminding you that human ingenuity and care have always shaped the act of eating into something deeply meaningful. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let the lingering aroma of honey, spices, and fresh bread settle into your senses. The medieval kitchens, feasts, and forgotten recipes fade softly, leaving you with a comforting warmth, a gentle hunger for knowledge, and a whisper of adventure yet to taste. Rest here in the quiet and the memories, knowing that the echoes of these kitchens, the hum of preparation, and the thrill of flavor will accompany you gently into sleep. Let the stories of old recipes and culinary ingenuity drift through your mind like smoke from a warm hearth, soothing, intriguing, and softly fatting into night. Sweet dreams.